Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I'm your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is February 21st. It is approximately 5:30 in the evening, and I wanted to talk to you about what we have been seeing trending in the news media, in Twitter all day, World War III. We want to talk to you about what has now happened with Russia, nuclear weapons. How did we get to this point that nuclear weapons are on the table and Putin has rejected all treaties to suspend nuclear actions? It's a dangerous place that we are now finding ourselves in the world, and it needs to be understood in some fullness that we are not getting on the nightly news in a minute and a half, in 30-second sound bites from various pundits. And that's the purpose of this channel. We go back in time. We look at the fullness of what brought us to the situations we face now so we can better understand what will be the outcome in the future. What are the consequences? We hope you will follow us with this, where we are, how we got to where we are today, and where we might be in the future. We hope you will enjoy this. Now, if it is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. As we said, we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet will allow to reach you, to hear your tweets, your chats, and your phone calls from anywhere in the world to tell us what you think about the issues that are affecting us all. We hope that you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time because we believe in free speech. You have a right to talk about the issues that affect you, even if your government doesn't agree, even if the internet overlords don't agree. So, looking at the situation, the news that has come out today, Putin has now escalated the situation in Ukraine, bringing nuclear weapons pretty much to the table. We are on the edge of what many believe will be World War III, or as we have said on this channel for many years, 3 regional wars. The conflict is escalating. Europe will likely be drawn in. What's going to happen next? Well, to really understand what's going to happen next, we have to understand, how did we get here? What were the elements that brought us here? Is there something that is telling Putin, China, North Korea, and Iran that they should be escalating, that they should have no fear of the United States? Is there anything that is giving them an impetus to take the actions they are taking? Well, let's find out. Let's go back in time. Let's start off all the way back to the 2020 election, where Joe Biden and President Donald Trump, were engaged in debates. Now, there were only 2 debates, and the second debate was supposed to have a substantive discussion, a substantive debate about foreign policy. Now, this is a very important issue because Joe Biden touted himself and was touted by Democrats as being a strong international leader because of his decades of work in Congress, because of his time as vice president. He was touting to the American people. He knew the world leaders. He knew Chairman Xi of the Communist Party of China, that he knew Vladimir Putin because of his time as vice president. And because of these relationships that he had, he was able to better negotiate and better discuss international politics with these leaders because they already respected him. That's what he told us in 2019 and 2020 on the campaign trail. Now, in the actual only debate addressing foreign policy, and one of the few times in the election that foreign policy was addressed, well, according to CNN Politics, on Friday, October 23rd of 2020, it was a meaningless debate. In fact, their analyst James Griffins said, "We had a good relationship with Hitler before he invaded the rest of Europe." That was how Democratic candidate Joe Biden summed up Donald Trump's approach to foreign policy. This was it. He goes on to say, "It was a line that might well play well among Biden's base, but with its vague allusions to appeasement in the run-up to World War II, it was indicative of a debate that had little genuine substance when it came to the current foreign policy challenges, with both leaders choosing to use other countries as attack lines more than anything else. That made it very clear. In 2019-2020, there was no substantive discussion of foreign policy. We merely had the fact that Joe Biden said he had prior experience and that he was respected. Those were his words, that he was respected around the world. And President Trump had an America First policy. He wanted to focus on American issues primarily before he dealt with anything else, and that he wanted to show American strength as a deterrent. In some areas that had success, in some areas that did not. But that was the proposition made to America in 2020. Joe Biden took the White House. And that brings us, going forward in time, to his first day in office. What did Joe Biden do? Well, the very first thing he did was he went to Syria. Joe Biden doubled the number of American troops in Syria on his first day in office. It was an immediate reaction. And by the way, we're going to be going through a lot of the coverage we have made on the various subjects over the last 2 years. And in each one, you can go to the descriptions of that video and you will see 6, 10, 20 sources that we use to come to the conclusions that we present to you, the evidence that we see around the world at that time. We do advise you, if you want to look more deeply, you can look at all the sources that we have provided. But to sum it up, the first thing that Joe Biden did was go to Syria, and he doubled the amount of troops, American troops, fighting in the Syrian civil war. Now, we're talking about Russia. We're talking about how do we get there today. The two elements that we need to be aware of. In 2019 and 2020, Joe Biden said he had a good relationship with Russia in terms of that he could speak with Putin and that Putin respected him. That's critical. And in his first day in office, he increased the number of American troops fighting in a war that Russia opposed. To be clear, Russia entered the Syrian civil war in 2015 under the Obama-Biden administration. And Russia took the side of Syria, whereas the United States took the opposing side, both supporting Kurds but also rebel forces fighting against the Assad Syrian government. So we were in direct opposition, politically against each other, and fighting essentially a proxy war in Syria. So the first action that Joe Biden did was increase the tension in the Middle East and increase the tensions with Russia. A direct statement to Vladimir Putin that he was in opposition of Russia and Vladimir Putin. That was followed up March 18th of 2021. Joe Biden was playing Russian roulette. It was at that time that Joe Biden was calling Vladimir Putin a killer, that he was a bad guy, a rogue, that Joe Biden had more strength, internal, intestinal strength, and governmental strength and allies around the world more than Putin did, and that Putin should back down. Something that Putin called his bluff on. Putin had absolutely no fear of Joe Biden at that time. Probably no time since. And he called out Joe Biden, saying that they should go and speak at the G7 meeting, that they should speak with each other in person. And when Joe Biden did, Joe Biden backed down. Vladimir Putin called Joe Biden's bluff. This is early in the Biden administration, and it clearly set a line in the sand. Joe Biden would say many things to the American people to look strong, but when confronted with the people he is actually speaking about, he took a softer, more subservient tone. That's not a leadership of strength. That's not something that you can just bluff your way through. At the same time, we do need to remember that Joe Biden was looking to put a climate czar in place. The number one name, and eventually the individual who would be picked, was John Kerry. Now, this is important because John Kerry was the Secretary of State under the Obama-Biden administration. Now, that's important because he had international relationships, but he was not seen as a strong leader. One of his crowning achievements was to provide hundreds of billions of dollars to Iran, and that was used to conduct global terror. That is something that John Kerry himself said in January of 2016 on CNBC News, that the money given to Iran for the Iran nuclear deal increased the net global terror in the world. So John Kerry was not seen as a strong figure, but he is important because, as we saw very shortly afterwards, John Kerry, in April of 2027, he was an individual, he was pointed out as possibly being a traitor, that he was someone who actually betrayed the trust of the United States and Israel to benefit Iran, to help promote the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump had removed. This is critical on an international stage, that Joe Biden was leaning on old individuals, older administrations, and he's leaning on these individuals who have a history of increasing global terror, of not understanding the consequences of their actions, that have actually taken steps that hurt the allies of the United States and the United States' position in international politics. And this is one of the leading figures at the time, in April of 2021, that was going to be put in a significant position of climate change, one of the most critical goals of the Biden administration of progressive ideology, that was more important than every other subject on the face of the planet. At least, that's the message they told us. So, as you can see developing, there is a message, a through line going here, that Joe Biden, when confronted, will not stand his ground, that he is relying on individuals who have no concept of the consequences they have created, especially when those consequences have negative impacts to the American people. This is the image that is being created by the United States. And this is the message that is being sent to Russia and the rest of the world. Vladimir Putin, further, when he first started in April, as John Kerry was being revealed as a potential traitor, and we believe he was a traitor, as that was happening, it was in April of 2021 that Vladimir Putin decided to start moving his troops towards the Ukraine, starting to build up and mass his forces for a possible invasion. That was in April. Now it's critical, and I know this article from the Center for Strategic and International Studies was talking about the buildup in September of 2021, but it was in April when we saw that buildup first start. And what was the reaction by the Biden-Harris administration? Nothing. They really had very little to say about it. They, of course, denounced it and said Putin should not move forward, but in that environment where we had already seen Joe Biden had already backed down to Vladimir Putin, that Joe Biden was not standing by policies and he was increasing the conflict between the United States and Russia, Russia really wasn't getting anything to force him to stop. And when he made that buildup, there was no real action by the United States or NATO to force them to stop moving forward, to stop with the invasion. That's the environment we found ourselves in the spring of 2021. That was further complicated by the Biden administration in May of 2021, as we reported, where the conflicts between Iran and the United States were all in favor of Iran. That Joe Biden, in his desperation to get the Iran nuclear deal, was essentially politically falling over himself to make that deal happen. This is important because, again, this is another signal to Russia and the world, to China as well, that the Biden administration was looking for a victory. They were looking for a win. They weren't as concerned about the consequences to the world as they were the politics they were looking to attain, to have a victory and to show that Trump was bad and Biden was good. And this element pervaded throughout. In June of 2021, we again heard that the Middle East was lost. Not only was it Iran, but also Afghanistan. That we were already seeing the elements of Afghanistan being lost to the Taliban as Joe Biden was trying to put together a hectic and badly thought out exit from Afghanistan. And the world was watching this step by step. It was not looking good in any way. In fact, the news media was covering up for this. As we covered, and this was in June 28th, tensions were rising around the world and everyone knew that Afghanistan, the Taliban, were making inroads throughout Afghanistan, taking over more and more territory because of the weakness of the leadership of Joe Biden, that there were no concrete plans in place. Now, many people said, well, it's going to work itself out. This is because of President Trump. They blamed it on many, many things. But the world leaders in China, in Iran, in Russia, in North Korea, what they saw was someone who did not have a plan, did not understand the consequences of their actions, and someone who is not prepared to take military steps, strong steps, to establish their position both in that moment and in the future. Understanding that Joe Biden had increased the U.S. presence in the Syrian war, increasing tensions with Russia, increasing tensions with Iran, that he was busy trying to find a way to recreate the Iran nuclear deal because of the political element, the approval he would have within his supporters, regardless of the consequences that we already know had already been admitted since 2016 to increase global terror. So Joe Biden was willing to look good politically to his supporters while throwing his allies internationally under a bus under increased global terror. That would weaken our allies, strengthen our enemies. And our enemies noticed that, in particular in Russia. But perhaps the killing blow was on August 15th of 2021, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan with American troops already present, that the Biden-Harris administration had so badly understood the nature of the situation, they had so badly planned for consequences, they were so busy trying to run away and play politics in the United States that they lost an entire country while their troops, our troops, American troops, were on the ground. This is a bad situation. And it led to CNN stating that not to worry, the Taliban was mostly friendly, that the message coming from the White House was that this was actually under control, this was okay, this situation was handled, that there was no reason to panic, they had leadership and they had an understanding, and this would be negotiated. That message was being told to us in August 17th, 2 days after the surprise attack and loss of the entire country. Was it true? No. Because by the time August 25th rolled around, the United States was in full-fledged retreat. They were running away because the Biden-Harris administration was forcing U.S. troops to leave as quickly as possible, giving up entire bases, giving up weapons, giving up ammunition and money, just leaving it on the ground, leaving in the middle of the night, abandoning our allies that had been supporting us for 2 decades and leaving them to the mercy of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban. as Joe Biden was trying to run away. And in that process, not only was he running away from the Taliban, a minor faction, maybe 1,000, 2,000, a couple thousand of terrorists, barely armed. He was running away from them and leaving not just weapons, not just bases and technology and money, he was leaving American citizens behind. Even on August 25th, it was clearly understood that America was not able to evacuate all American citizens and would not be able to do so by the deadline that had been placed by the Taliban on Joe Biden. This is critical. This is critical not because of anything other than this was an endemic of the fact that Joe Biden was weak. He could not understand the consequences of his actions, and in the eyes of the world leaders of China, Iran, and Russia and North Korea, Joe Biden did not have a plan, nor did he have the leadership, the strength to stand up in a crisis. His answer and his instinct was to run away and try to minimize the political impact, even though his allies and American citizens were endangered because of that. Add to that the breaking news, which came out on September 14th, after 5,000 Americans were abandoned by the Biden-Harris administration. And the last time that Joe Biden would ever mention how many Americans have been abandoned and left behind, he has never since talked about Afghanistan or those Americans. General Mark Milley was identified as another figure, high-ranking figure in the Biden-Harris administration that committed treason. Now that makes both John Kerry and Mark Milley essential key figures in the Biden-Harris administration whose actions were taken directly against the best interest of the United States. Now, when we think about that, so China has seen, and Russia and North Korea and Iran have seen that Joe Biden has lost to a terrorist organization, Taliban, a couple thousand people, and lost an entire country, lost billions of dollars of weapons and bases, and threw their own people under a bus, that they have been unable to properly anticipate international reactions around the globe, that they also have been blustering. And whenever confronted about that bluster, Joe Biden has backed down over and over and over again. That's why in 2021, Russia decided, since they had already made their troop buildup, because Joe Biden had backed down to Vladimir Putin, to China, to Iran, because Joe Biden lost in Afghanistan in the worst way possibly, that because he had no strength to stand up for 5,000 American citizens, which is his absolute responsibility and obligation, that they had nothing to fear, that there was no consequence. And Russia began to mobilize and to make it clear to the world they were going to enter the Ukraine. And one of the first things that Joe Biden had to say about Russia making their indications of invading Ukraine clear, the very first thing that Joe Biden had to say, as reported on December 10th of 2021, he told the Ukraine to do what Chamberlain recommended. He wanted them to appease Russia. He wanted them to give up their land, to give up the eastern portion of the Ukraine, to allow Russia to have access to the Black Sea, which would give it access to the Mediterranean and impact much of Europe. That they were to give up their grain and the wheat, the fertilizer, the uranium, and the strategic placement, to just give up their land and their people, and it would be okay, to keep Russia calm. That was the first thing that Joe Biden had to say about this. Again, this is an individual who is, from Russia's eyes, from China's eyes, from North Korea's eyes, from Iran's eyes, they are seeing someone who has backed down every time he has been challenged, who has made decisions without understanding the consequences of those decisions, who has leadership aides that are advising him, and they have no faith in the United States, apparently, and that he is willing to give up his own people and his allies for the political appearance of being strong. That, of course, never will lead to success, especially when countries are being aggressors. And so, what did we see? Well, in the days after that, by January 11th of 2022, there were talks. Russia, North Korea, Iran are all trying to test Joe Biden in various aspects. And we're not talking about North Korea here or Iran, which have their own elements in this, but all of the nations that have a gripe with the United States, all these nations that have long-term histories of aggression with the United States, all started escalating their positions and taking more aggressive stances and starting to press Joe Biden to see what he would do and to see what resistance they would face. And it was pretty obvious to the world at that point that by January 25th, we knew that World War III was imminent, or at least that was one of the things many people were talking about. People were afraid. They could see that there was an escalation happening, especially with Russia and Ukraine, that would involve NATO, Germany, and of course the United States. And how would the United States react? The United States, the de facto leader of NATO, the leader of the world, the superpower of the world, what were we going to do? And the question amongst most people was at the time, is Biden strong enough to actually do anything about it? Well, we got that answer because it was on February 10th that Joe Biden went on to NBC News speaking to Lester Holt, and he said, he doubled down on his Afghanistan policy, that he would abandon 10 to 20,000 American citizens, including children, into Ukraine and leave them alone, to leave them on their own, even if a war was occurring and they were threatened, endangered, or killed. He said this to Lester Holt on international news, that the United States will not protect its own people. Thousands, 10,000 American citizens would not be protected. 10,000 children of the United States would not be protected under any circumstance. He made it as clear as it could be. Under that environment, looking at that time frame, February 10th, it was made clear. Joe Biden had already backed down whenever confronted. Joe Biden talked big to get good politics, but did nothing. Joe Biden had no plans for the Middle East or international policy. Joe Biden reacted poorly whenever put into a crisis situation and normally took the worst decision possible, possibly because the individuals advising him did not have the United States as its first and primary focus. And now we see that after being lambasted for trying to duplicate the 1938 appeasement acts of Neville Chamberlain, Joe Biden has now said he just gave up. He gave up the American citizens. If we're looking at this from any other nation in the world, does everything that I have just discussed sound like strength? Does it sound like someone saying you can't go forward, that there will be consequences and repercussions for your actions, and that they would be severe? Would you have any faith and trust that Joe Biden would do anything that would negatively impact you, especially when he won't even protect his own people? Of course, this led to Kamala Harris going out, as reported by the LA Times on February 19th of 2022, saying that she stands with the Ukraine and said and reiterated that Joe Biden, the United States, would be tough on Russia, on Vladimir Putin, if he did anything, which is probably the worst thing you could do. Kamala Harris has been a failure at international politics everywhere she has gone. She has embarrassed the United States every time she has spoken overseas. Everywhere she has gone has resulted in a negative consequence for the American people. And she is even less respected than Joe Biden. She is even less feared than Joe Biden, having no interactions with these world leaders, having nothing and done nothing that would engender any kind of confidence. Even our allies in South Korea were upset with Kamala Harris because of the way she acted and the way she embarrassed the United States in dealing with our ally in South Korea. There was no one who had trust, faith, or confidence in Kamala Harris. And hearing her echo the words of Joe Biden just made them even more hollow. It was a confirmation that nothing was going to be done of any consequence. So, as a result, only days later, 5 days after Kamala Harris reiterated the threats of Joe Biden against Russia, Vladimir Putin gave the word and invaded the Ukraine. Many people said that this would be a very short war, that it would be over in 30 days, that it would be over in 3 months. At the most extreme, many in the news media, in American news media, were saying it would be over in 6 months. One way or another, this was not going to be a war going on a long term. Joe Biden took action and decided that he was going to implement sanctions, that was his reaction, not troops, not so much weapons, more so to put sanctions against Russia, to enact a proxy economic war using the Ukraine as the go-through. And that NATO would join the United States, that they would follow the United States' lead in putting sanctions against Russia. How good was that? How effective was that? It was actually counterproductive. Because as we have learned then, and as we see continuing to this day, Russia's economy has been doing better. The price of the ruble increased. Their economy stabilized, while the rest of the world was having an increase, and in some places exponential increase in inflation, something that had started in the Biden administration in February of 2021 and has continued even to this day in increasing. The world went into a recession. Inflation took over across the world, especially for the European Union, NATO, and the United States. But Russia, they were actually doing well. Economically, this was working out for them. The sanctions had no real impact. Not only was this good for Russia because their economy was doing better, but the pressure on the rest of the world was even more severe because the war cut the food supply for the world. It took away the fertilizer needed across the world and indicated to the world that there would be a 30 to 40% grain shortage, food shortage around the world because of this war, which would negatively impact the United States and its allies, and we're still not quite up to date yet. But again, look at the steps that we have seen that were taken, the lack of precautions, because while the United States knew that once this war started, fertilizer would not be available, that would have a negative impact on food in the world. It would create a global food shortage. Joe Biden, not understanding consequences, did not warn the American people, did not advise them to prepare. He did nothing except have his proxy economic war and send more and more weapons and money from the United States over to the Ukraine, which was not defeating Russia, nor was it preventing the economic consequences, the negative impact to the United States and our allies. And then, as a result of this, to further enhance the problem, the Ukraine, in September of 2022, decided to suggest that they would enter into NATO. Something that was adamant, Russia was adamant, could not be possible. And the mere suggestion broke down any negotiations and any ceasefires that were capable. That is a reason for them to continue to fight, not to cease the fighting. Where was Joe Biden in this? Floundering. Zelensky was looking to go into the NATO, to get the protection of NATO, to bring NATO and the United States into the war physically, on the ground, fighting for the Ukraine. It made sense for him to make his move. Russia was adamant, unshakably adamant, that that could not happen, giving them more motivation to continue the fight in the Ukraine. And Joe Biden was nowhere to be seen. He had nothing to say. And thus we had to ask the question, when it was November 15th of 2022, we were asking, what is the Biden foreign policy? Because it seems to be hurting world peace. It doesn't seem to be helping world peace. Not just in what we see in Russia and the Ukraine, but in China, Iran, North Korea. North Korea, by that time, having fired over 70 missiles, ICBMs and hypersonic missiles at South Korea and Japan, with many of them capable of hitting the United States. The world was recognizing Joe Biden was weak, that he had no strength, and he was not offering any solution that would help him. At the same time, in the United States, as we reported on December 2nd, studies were coming out, reports were coming out. Socialism was increasing in the United States. One of the very key factors for Russia, for North Korea, for China, that socialism was undermining the public, the root and core of the United States. So not only was Joe Biden weak, but America was becoming weaker as America decided to try and recruit soldiers under the idea of having two moms, of being warm and fuzzy and being nice. That wasn't how China was recruiting its soldiers. That's not how Russia was recruiting its soldiers, being absolutely honest with them that they would be engaged in aggressive, active warfare, but the United States trying to say it's all about feelings and feeling good. This did not escape the attention of nations around the world who started to work together. China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia working together against the United States, working together specifically to target the United States negatively. And it was only complicated more when Joe Biden then went forward and traded Brittany Griner, a WNBA entertainer, for the world's leading arms dealer. It was incredible. Brittany Griner, an admitted criminal who was correctly and justly put through the Russian process and convicted of a crime that she admits she committed, and the United States gave up the leading arms dealer in the world, someone responsible for civil wars and riots and death around the globe, especially in Africa. It was a massive political faux pas. This was a mistake. The math didn't make sense. Brittany Griner isn't worth the world's largest arms dealer, someone who is wanted in multiple nations for many, many decades. And they traded an entertainer for her? He left an American citizen, a soldier, someone who was declared an innocent. He left them in Russia, former United States Marine, but got the entertainer instead, reinforcing the fact that Joe Biden was focused on politics, on how this looked amongst his core base of supporters. Brittany Griner was negotiated for and released because she's black and gay and it was politically advantageous. Not because that was a fair trade, not because that put an advantage to the United States. The advantage, in fact, was for Russia and for warlords around the world. In releasing Victor Bout, the United States increased the net global terror in the world, which reinforces for Russia and China, Iran, and North Korea, it reinforces the thought that the United States is weak, that they are more focused on politics than consequences of their actions, and that there is no strength behind the United States and its military. We did recap much of this earlier this year. January 19th of 2023, we recapped something that was very important about this, because throughout this process, and most recently, even in NATO, there was fracturing. Germany would not send tanks unless the United States sent tanks. Poland was willing to send their German tanks to the Ukraine, even if Germany said no. That would have caused a division. That would have broke NATO, having its nations fight amongst each other about the support and the level of support they would give to the Ukraine. Joe Biden, the leader, had nothing to say to these nations until he did exactly what Germany wanted him to do, what Germany had forced him to do. After spending weeks saying that the United States would not send M1 Abrams tanks into the Ukraine, that we would not give them to them, we gave the Ukraine 31 tanks. The problem here is we didn't want to give that to them because it requires American troops to go with those tanks, because the Ukraine is not capable of maintaining those tanks or training people to use those tanks. They need American soldiers on the ground. Just like in Germany, to use the Leopard 2 tank, it would require German troops on the ground. So Germany forced America to go first, to take the lead, to put their troops first. Germany was manipulating America. And the world watched that manipulation and saw that it was effective. That leads us to where we are now, where, according to ABC News, just on February 18th, Russia was accused of committing crimes against humanity by Vice President Harris. Well, as we have already identified, whenever Kamala Harris goes out and decides to speak for the United States, the very worst outcome always happens. They really need to stop having her speak. She's weak. She's not respected. She engenders the exact opposite reaction of whatever it is she's there to do. And she was there to try to embarrass Russia and Vladimir Putin, to threaten them with a question that is very important. What are you going to do? Threatening Russia, threatening Vladimir Putin, saying that they've committed crimes against humanity, that they will be punished by the world. What do you think they're going to do? Are they going to back down? Are they going to stop? To only be punished further? It was an empty threat that was reiterated by Antony Blinken, as we mentioned today in a tweet. Kamala Harris goes to Munich with empty threats to Russia. Blinken backs her up. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, supports her, as he should, in the administration. Biden then went to Ukraine. He ignored the problem, the emergency, the disaster in Ohio affecting thousands of American citizens. And instead of even visiting that to see what was happening, to somehow give the reassurance to the American people that he had a plan, that they would be taken care of, even as his administration had already been accused of undermining these people, of ignoring their plight, of throwing them to the wayside, instead of reassuring the American people and adding confidence, he went to the Ukraine to support the Ukraine efforts, to give the Ukraine more money, to shore up that political effort. Why would Joe Biden go to the Ukraine instead of to a disaster site in the United States, a disaster site that his administration had been negatively attacked for, that they were being beat up in the news media, and American people had lost faith, were losing faith actively by day because of the response. Why wouldn't he go and reassure the American people? Because he's weak. Because it was politically disadvantageous. Once again, the world got to see the priorities. Joe Biden wants to look strong. He wants to move his political agenda forward at all costs. But he's not willing to actually do something substantive. It's like in 2019, 2020, in the election campaign. There was no substance, but there was a lot of talk. There was no understanding of consequences, but he wanted to look good. And because Kamala Harris has no respect in the world amongst world leaders, because there was an empty threat, even if it came from Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, because Joe Biden was willing to throw American citizens under the bus again for the third time. 5,000 Americans in Afghanistan, 10,000 Americans in the Ukraine, God knows how many thousands of Americans in Ohio. Again, he throws Americans under the bus for his political posturing, showing that he is weak and not concerned about the people, undermining the confidence of America in him and reducing the likelihood of any consequence against China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Therefore, Russia did the only thing that was absolutely logical in that case. Putin decided to strike back harshly. He ended all of the agreements, the nuclear agreements from the START nuclear pact, leaving Russia fully and absolutely capable of using nuclear weapons at any moment, not just in the Ukraine, but for any action, intervention, war, or tension around the globe. It is the riskiest place that the United States has been in since roughly the 1970s. It is the most unsure state of existence for nuclear powers in decades. And this is a direct consequence of Joe Biden and his actions. We maintain on this channel, this is a direct and natural consequence because of what Joe Biden has done, because of what he has presented, because he has no foreign policy, he has no plan, and he does not know how to react to the consequences, because Joe Biden is focused on politics. He's looking to push politics ahead of everything else, including American citizens. And world leaders, especially those who do not like America, see this. And our allies are losing confidence because of this. That's why Japan is now building its own army, why South Korea is threatening to build their own nuclear weapons because they have no belief in the Biden-Harris administration protecting them. And that's why we see that Russia has now said that they are willing to use nuclear weapons. Now, I've gone through this in some detail to bring you from 2019 to 2023, showing you all the elements, just focusing on Russia alone, not including what happened in North Korea, what's been happening with China and Taiwan, our difficulties with our allies in South Korea and Japan, not even touching on really the issues in the Middle East, whether it be in Syria or with Iran, and how we have abandoned essentially our allies in Israel. We're not even looking at the rest of the world and the problems that are ongoing. We're not even talking about the fact that 98 suspected terrorists had entered the United States in 2022. We're not even dealing with the other problems, inflation and everything else. Just looking at how Russia watched the Biden-Harris administration fold and fail for years. Are we surprised that we are now on the edge of World War III? Are we surprised that we are actively becoming part of a regional war? Are we surprised that there is no fear or respect for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris? So now comes the part where we have to ask the question, what is the consequence of this? Again, if you doubt the conclusion we're making here, look back over the last 3 years, 4 years. Look at each of the articles we have identified, and in the description of every video we have done, the dozens of articles that we have sourced to make the conclusions we have come to. Look at it through the time to bring us to today. And then ask yourself, given that weakness, given that failure to stand up, to lead, to have a plan, and to understand the consequences of that plan, what do you think is going to happen next? Is Russia going to stop fighting in the Ukraine? No, of course not. Is the Ukraine war going to end in another 2 months? No. Another 6 months? No. Most likely that war will continue for 10 years. Not 1 year, not 2 years, 10 years, possibly 20. This is a war very much like what we saw in Vietnam, what we have seen in Afghanistan, what we have seen in Iraq, what's going on in Syria. We are talking about a multi-decade war. If the United States continues to fund this war and use Ukraine as its economic proxy, and very shortly, we will have troops on the ground, which will require even more troops from the United States, even more troops from NATO. They will be called advisors, and those advisors will need support, and thus more troops will be sent in, and more troops will be sent in, and we will be engaged in this war longer and longer term. And the more force that we are applying, the more that Russia will apply force back. Because Russia is confident that Joe Biden will back down first. Because he has always backed down first. All Russia has to do is wait for the political blowback to be high enough and Joe Biden will fold. They have that confidence based on years of observation. That does not bode well for Ukraine or the United States or Europe. What will happen next? We believe on this channel, we've been saying for several years, this isn't World War III. We don't believe Russia will use nukes, but the threat will add to the pressure politically for Joe Biden, and that's what he reacts to. But we believe very strongly that China will take this as its signal to start its aggressions against Taiwan, possibly Japan, possibly South Korea. That North Korea will see this as their signal to go in and to take over South Korea. That we will see a second regional war in Southeast Asia because Joe Biden is weak and doesn't understand the consequences of his actions and is willing to throw his allies under a bus for political posturing. We believe that in the Middle East, Iran will increase its actions. It is already continuing to fund rebels, terrorists in Yemen and throughout the Middle East, that they will increase their actions as they approach the potential of having a nuclear weapon, that Israel will actively oppose, creating higher tensions in the Middle East than we have seen in decades. Not like the Afghanistan, not like Syrian conflict. We're talking about open warfare. And that will be the third region. We don't believe nukes will be used, but that will be 3 active regions fighting. And Joe Biden doesn't have a plan. He doesn't understand the consequences. And he is willing to throw everyone, including American citizens, and especially our allies, under a bus to try and find a political outcome that looks good for him and his party and allows them to maintain power in the next election. Kamala Harris is even worse. Perhaps you disagree with our review. Perhaps you find some elements you don't like. Put aside your feelings and look at the evidence that we have presented and that we have been made available for you over the last several years. Look at the evidence and the consequences, and then tell us if we're right or wrong. Tell us, do you think Russia has any incentive to stop fighting in the Ukraine? That continued pressure from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will have any positive impact on Vladimir Putin or Russia? That this is not encouraging China, North Korea, and Iran? We believe that within 5 years, the United States will be engaged in 3 regional wars. Not World War III, but 3 regional wars. But we are open to hearing what you have to say, to see what you think. We thank you for taking the time to go through this with us, to get a good understanding of what has happened that led to where we are today and will lead us to where we will be tomorrow. We hope we will see you on our Sunday live stream at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you soon.